Hello! Today I'm going to be building the Duck Dodgers X-2 Invader rocket model kit. This kit is put out by MPC and is part of a 3-model series that are all based on the 1950s Looney Tunes that featured Duck Dodgers and Marvin the Martian and Porky Pig and K9. All these kind of center around the same theme. Now, the instructions for this particular rocket are vague in places. And so I would highly recommend, if you're fairly new to model rocketry, that you watch this entire video before actually trying to assemble it yourself. And you'll come out with a better outcome, I think. So when we come back here, we will start with a check of the instructions and all the parts and start building the rocket. As with any model rocket kit, it's a good idea to make sure that you have all the parts beforehand. If you notice here, there are some little pencil marked numbers on my instructions here. Those are the weights of the individual parts, and I just did those ahead of time so that I can put this into some rocket simulation software later on. They have nothing to do with the building of the kit. Okay, so we'll start off with, we have a body tube here. And this is completely pre-colored. No painting is required for this kit. And this is true of all 3 in the series. This is actually very much like the SD's E2X series of kits, where you pretty much can just put these together in about an hour, and as soon as the glue dries, they're ready to fly. So here's our body tube. We have a very large nose cone here. Alright, a fin can, and this will attach to the bottom of the body tube and will accept the fins in the motor mount. Alright, there should be a total of 4 fins here, and these will attach to the fin can. There's some little decorative nozzles. These will attach to the bottom of the fin can around the actual motor mount. Alright, we have a rubber shock cord. In some kits this may look like a big piece of a rubber band, in others it's some elastic like this. Either one, that's going to be fine. And then we have a parachute that will be all folded up here. This will eventually unfold and we'll have to cut this out. And then this also comes with some shroud line material and some clear stick-on adhesive pads that will attach the string to the parachute. Okay. We have a shock cord anchor. If you've done a lot of SD's kits, a lot of times this is printed in the instructions. For this kit, it's actually printed all by itself so that you don't have to destroy the instructions in order to get to the anchor. Then we have a motor clip here. And a little bit later on, as we get into the building of the model, I'm going to make a suggestion of something that you can add to this. It won't be required to finish the model, but we'll get back to that. And then finally, we have the actual motor mount tube. If you've done other models, you may notice that this is a little bit shorter than most. That's okay, you'll see why here later on. The engine, when put into this model, extends out the back a little bit further than other models may. And then finally, some handy-dandy self-stick decals. This will go on to mostly the plastic parts of the rocket when we're all finished. And one other thing, almost forgot these. These are the launch lugs. These are a little thicker than your typical launch lug, but they work in the same way, and we'll be gluing these onto the body, one of the last steps. Okay. Make sure that you've also got a few supplies available, either some white glue or wood glue. Either one of these is fine. You'll need some plastic model cement, or in lieu of that, you can also use thick super glue. Okay, I actually prefer the model cement because it partially melts the plastic, and then as it evaporates, that bonds to the body tube quicker. But if you don't have this, the thick type of super glue or cyanoacrylate glue works fine. All right, you'll need a hobby knife and then a ruler. This one's kind of long, but it'll work. And then you'll also want a pencil of some sort to make some temporary markings that will erase later on. We'll also need a little bit of tape. Clear tape like this is what's recommended in the instructions. A little bit of masking tape would probably work as well. Okay, when we come back here, I'm going to clear most of this off and we will start in on the actual building of the rocket. The first part of the instructions here have to deal with the engine mount assembly. And this is the engine mount tube here. And then this will go inside the fin can when we're done. Alright, so I'm just going to dry fit everything and make sure those fit. And when you do this, the instructions actually don't show here how far this should go in. Okay, so what we want to do is do a little bit of test fitting here and see how it's going to look, and then determine which way is going to be best. Okay, so I'm going to take this out, and according to the measurements here, we need a little slit at 2 inches or about 50 millimeters from the bottom edge. Alright, so I'm going to find here 5 millimeters, or excuse me, 5 centimeters or 50 millimeters. That's going to be right here. And I'm just going to poke a little hole in there. Alright, being careful not to poke my finger. This doesn't need to be very large, just over about 1/16 of an inch, because what we're going to do then is take our engine hook and poke that through the hole. Okay, if it doesn't poke readily, we'll just enlarge that a little bit. I think it's actually wide enough, it's just the narrowness of the blade. So I'm just going to wiggle the blade in there a little bit. There we go. Okay, so that's going to fit like that. Okay, now it says to secure this in place with wood glue. Wood glue is not going to stick to the metal piece here. And so for the instructions also show here that you can put a clear piece of tape over this. Alright, and that's also not going to be really strong, so I'm going to do this a little bit differently. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to make sure this is straight, and if you put it in the right place, this tube's got a seam down it, if you want to use that to see how parallel you get. I'm going to wrap this around just below where we poked it in there, and it doesn't quite meet, so I'm going to put some more on. And the reason I'm doing this is I want the tape itself to go all the way around and come back and adhere to itself, which is going to make it stronger than if we're just depending on it to adhere to the cardboard. So I'm making a band here all the way around it. Okay, I'm going to put this in again. One of the things that's going to do is make it a little tighter there, so that's got a lot of resistance. I'm going to pull that back out. Okay, so I've got like a layer and a half of tape on there, probably fine. I'm not going to worry about it too much, but just be aware of it. All right, and there is a slot here that is meant for the engine hook. So if you get your engine hook a little off there, it's going to be really tight. All right, this is just somewhat tight. Okay, so if I leave it like that, and then when I put a motor into this, you may not have one right now, I'm just going to do this as an example. Alright, that's going to fit right in here. Okay, so that motor hangs out quite a bit compared to what we see in most model rockets. And I am more than a little tempted to change this up a little bit. I'm going to push this up a little here. Okay, and what I'm doing is making sure I can still open the clip if it's that far up. Just barely. Okay, so I'm going to pull this back out. And remove the motor here. Okay, so we're going to come back to this. I'm going to just peel off a little bit of the tape from what I put on there, just because it is kind of thick and a little bit stiff going in. Find the edging in here. There we go. So I'm going to peel that last layer I had put on off of it. Which means I only have the single thickness here, and we will go with that. Okay. Now I'm still really concerned about how well this is going to stay attached. So I'm going to go ahead and put just a little piece of tape here, kind of like what they show. All the way down. Make sure this still fits. Okay, so if I slide that all, oops, it's the other way around. Make sure we put it in the right end. All right, so I'm going to slide that all the way up so it's flush with the back end here. All right, sticking out the front now, we have the rest of the motor unit. Now, if you've built other rockets before, you'll note this does not have a thrust ring in here. So in most model rockets, there's a ring inside here that helps keep the engine in place. This is depending on just having that little bit of motor clip sticking through there. And for at least several flights, it's probably going to be fine. What can happen though is the more you launch this thing, the hot gases from the ejection charge of the motor may start to corrode that little clip in there, and eventually you may have a failure that results in the motor launching up through the body tube, which is kind of spectacular, but it's not particularly safe. So I'm going to recommend that you actually add something to this called a thrust ring. I'm going to pull this back out again. Okay, and a thrust ring looks like this. If you have a hobby store nearby, you might be able to just buy these. It's an 18mm thrust ring. As I said, most kits come with this, and it just fits right inside here. And we glue that in right above the clip. If you don't have one of these and don't have access to it, there are a couple other things you can do. If you have an expended motor casing like this, I tend to keep a lot of these for doing spacing and making mounts and displays and such. But what you can do is take a razor saw, which this is not, but take a lightweight saw and just cut off a ring that's about 5mm thick from this. Another alternative is a lot of kits come with spacers that are used for placing thrust rings. And so this is just the right size to fit inside of a motor mount. And so if you've built other models, for example, these ones came in the Estes Viking and the Estes Wizard. is the reason I have them. Many other kits come with them as well. And so you can do the same thing, is find about a 5mm thickness here, which I've actually done here already, and you can cut this out actually just using a razor knife here. And I'm going to do this. You don't even have to be perfect on it, especially since you're doing it from an end. You've got a nice square end right there. So I'm just going to cut around. If I don't get this perfectly straight, it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside. So this is not quite as thick as an actual thrust ring that you would buy specifically for the purpose, but it will do. All this is going to do is just reinforce that little clip inside and provide a surface edge that the motor can thrust upon. And this will just help keep the motor in place where it belongs and not traveling up through the body tube. Okay? So hopefully you're watching this video before you do all this build, and so you can catch up on some of the things that I've suggested here to make this rocket work better. Alright, so now what I'm going to do, we've still got our engine hook in place, we've taped it in here, alright, and we've done a dry fit. Okay, and that's going to stop here at the aft edge. And one of the reasons that this sticks out so far is because eventually we're going to put these little nozzles in here, and if the engine didn't stick out this far, we might actually melt the nozzles when it launched. Okay, so I'm going to take this back out again. Okay, and I'm going to take a little bit of our all-purpose glue. And I'm going to put this right inside right inside the engine tube. Okay, you don't want so much that it's going to run all over the place, but you do want a healthy amount here so that we glue the engine block nice and strong. Okay, so now I've got that, I'm going to take my homemade engine block here, and I'm going to slide that in. Okay, and this needs to go all the way down until it hits the top of the engine clip. And then just make sure that it is parallel all the way around. Now you might be able to see in there, there's a little bit of glue oozing around. And it's a good idea to take a little bit of tissue or paper towel and wipe that out. You can also use a cotton applicator or a Q-tip, which I've got here. So I'm just going to take this and use that to smear around there and just wipe up the excess. If we don't do this, it'll provide too much thickness inside and a motor might get stuck. Okay, so now I've moved that around in there. I'll set this aside. Okay, and so while we're doing the rest of this, the glue inside there can be drying, and as long as we don't have excess that's going to run down the edges, that's not going to be a problem there. Okay, now back to our instructions. We're going to glue this in using plastic model cement. Okay, and again, it's a little vague on how to do this. So what they're actually showing is to put this into place and then put some model cement around this edge and this edge. All right, that's not going to be very strong if we just do it that way. So what I'm going to do here is take this back out. Okay, and I'm going to use another Q-tip applicator here. And I haven't put any glue on this yet, but what I want to do is take some of the model cement and put it up inside here about halfway up. Okay, so I don't want to put it just right down here. I want to put it up further. You want to keep it out of the slot for the engine hook, but do get up close to it. And then what will happen is when we put this in, the glue that will be about here is going to smear itself up all the way along the length. And then we just have to be really good about quickly putting this up to the flush line here. I'm going to remove this little piece of cardboard. Okay. Because once that gets in, it's going to be hard to move it around too much to make final adjustments. Okay. But that's going to give us a much stronger bond than if we just try and put it around the edges here. Up on the other edge, we will go ahead and do that. We'll just put a bead of glue, what we call a fillet, around the entire circumference of the other end of this. Okay, so make sure everything test fits okay and that you've got a clear understanding of what you're going to do, because this next part is going to go really quickly. Okay, so we're going to take our cement and with anything gooey like this, make sure you're working over a disposable surface, even if it is just the instruction sheet. Okay, so I'm just going to put a bit of glue here. And again, you don't want to use too little, but also not too much. Everything in moderation. Alright, now I'm going to put this up, again, about halfway up and just move it all the way around. And here you just got to use a little bit of judgment about how much glue to use. I'm going to put a little more in there. The key thing is here, though, that you need to operate fairly quickly, because plastic model cement works by partially melting the plastic itself if it's polystyrene. Okay, so that all smeared around in there. And if you do get a little bit up in that channel, it's not going to hurt anything because most of the springiness is coming down from the bottom. Alright, so again, make sure that you're on the right end here and on the right end here. I'm going to put that in, and now I'm going to slide it up till it's flush. Okay. And now I'm going to let that just set and bond for a few minutes. If you need a little time to do something while you're waiting, you can go ahead and put the fillet on the other end. Just make sure that you don't bump this out of the tube. So here, I'm just going to put a bead of glue all the way around here. And if you're somewhat experienced in model rocketry, you know that in most cases when we talk about a fillet, we use our finger to smooth this out. We don't need to do that here. This isn't aerodynamic at all. In fact, it'll just make your finger gooey. Okay, so I even let a little bit dribble down into the groove there. That's okay. All right, so again, not too little, not too much, just enough to make a film all the way around our motor mount there. Okay, and I'm going to put this on a little block so that it will finish hardening upright. You don't have to, it's just this way it's less likely to dribble a little bit. And when we come back, I'm going to give this about 10 minutes or so to set up and harden. It won't be completely dry, but it'll be dry enough that we can work with it. And then the next part will be attaching the body tube. Alright, my glue has been drying here for a few minutes, and so the next part of this is going to be to attach the fin can here to the body tube. Now something to note, as part of their decoration, there's actually a grid on the body tube here. And you can use this in the next step for attaching the launch lugs. Now there's a seam along this where the giant sticker has been applied to the body tube. And personally, I like to use this for the launch lugs because it provides a little bit of an edge there that helps keep the launch lugs straight. And I'm dry fitting this right now with no glue yet, and just to make sure that it fits on. And we want to have this aligned in two ways. So one thing is the launch lugs need to go between two of the fins. And so this is where the fins will attach, so I've got it centered in between those two. And generally I don't like to have it directly close to where the engine hook is. So I'm going to move that around here. So this way it's not 90 degrees off, it's about 120 degrees off from the engine hook. But it's not going to be right where the engine hook is there. Okay, so I'm going to line it up right here. You can actually use these little grooves here in the fin can to line it up just perfect if that's the way you like to do it. Okay, so I'm going to pull this back out. Now again, this is showing application of the glue to the plastic here. I prefer to put the glue up inside the tube because it's less likely to squish out around the edges here. Okay, if you put it on here and then put the tube on, it's going to drag the glue down here and you'll end up with glue sticking out of the edge. If you do it up here, it'll still drag the glue up, but it's going to drag it up into the tube, and any excess will end up along the edge of here, which is actually good. That's going to give you a stronger bond. So in this case, I'm going to take my model glue again, and I'm going to run a bead of glue just inside the body tube here. Again, a moderate bead. And you don't want to get this too far up the body tube or you won't have anything for it to bind to. I'm shooting for about ½ a centimeter here, about 1/4 inch. And you can actually use the tip of the tube to kind of smooth it around there. Again, you don't want to wait too long after you get that in. Alright, and once more, okay, I want to make sure that this line is between two fins and not directly over the launch hook, or the engine hook. So I'm going to put this on like this. I'm going to give it a little twist back and forth. And this just helps set the cement here. And now I'm going to hold this for at least a minute here, and then I'm going to set it aside once more and let that glue harden. Now in this case, if you set it aside, you either want to set it up on its end like this, or if you had a little block of wood like I had before, you can set it up right like this. You don't want to set it on its side because these little fin mounts may cause it to cant a little bit and you'll end up with a crooked fin can body tube transition there. Okay, so we're going to take a break here once again, and when we come back we will add the launch lugs. Another few minutes have gone by and this should be glued enough that we can handle it again. Don't pull on the fin can to test that idea. But next we're going to put on the launch lugs, and as I said on mine, I'm going to go ahead and put them along the seam of the decal wrap on this. And according to the instructions, the first one of these is going to go at 70 millimeters from the base. So if I take my ruler here, so from the fin can, I'm just going to mark a little line here, 70 millimeters or 7 centimeters, and then another one at 250 millimeters or 25 centimeters. So that's going to be right here. Just make another little mark. If you use pencil, it means you can come back and erase those later if you need to. Okay, so again, I've got one mark down here, really hard to see, which is actually good, and another mark up here. Alright, and so these launch lugs kind of feel like plastic. They're actually wrapped in a decal as well. And so when you glue these, you want to glue the seam side of the launch lug to the seam side of the body tube, and that way you won't have any seams sticking out. It'll give you a smoother appearance. Alright, and so for these we're going to use the white glue or the wood glue. Now, one other thing you can do here, we're going to put the base of this at the mark, so it's going to go like right about there. And something you can do to give a little bit stronger bond is take your hobby knife here and just peel a little bit of this, hardly any at all. Okay, but we're just going to move a little bit of that colored surface there and just make it a little rougher. And you want to be careful that you don't go beyond the length of the launch lug, or it's going to show that you've done that. It won't affect the flight, but it does change the aesthetics a little bit. Alright, now I'm just going to check here that we still have lots of room. Okay, and that'll be fine. And the reason I do this is just having the rough surface means the glue can stick a little bit better. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm just going to kind of scrape my hobby knife across this just a little bit. And you can do this to the entire length of the launch lug, because it's not going to show anyway. Okay, and then we're just going to take our glue here. I'm going to add a bead of glue right along there. I use wood glue because it sets up a little bit quicker. The drawback to it is it does give that kind of yellow cast to it. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is set this right here along that seam, and then I'm going to pull it off. So I've got this little blob of glue there and another one like it on my launch lug, and I'm going to wait for 60 seconds and allow this to dry just a little bit. And what this does is makes the glue tacky, and then when we stick it back on it, we have less chance of it sliding around or moving away from where we wanted it. And you can do this with lots of paper, cardboard, and wood types of parts on model rockets. So if you're putting fins on, this one we don't have to, but if you're putting wood fins on a rocket, this same technique can work for that. Okay, and we'll do the same thing up here. So I don't know if a minute's quite gone by or not, but I'm going to go ahead and do this now. So I'm going to put it right back on. Okay, and then we're going to just check and make sure that we are aligned with the seam still. Push that in, give it some, and that should be good to go just like that. Okay, so we can let this finish drying. I'm going to move this off of the instructions just because it keeps trying to roll. But the fin can there will keep it from rolling too much. And while that one is setting up, I'm going to prep the second launch lug in the same way. So I'm going to just roughen up the launch lug a little bit here by dragging this across. You can also do this with a little bit of sandpaper if you don't want to use your hobby knife as a scraper. Okay, so if you've got just a little bit of fine sandpaper on hand, you could just take it like this and just give it just a little bit of a rub. Again, and you don't want to do this to the whole launch lug, just where it's going to glue there. And again, the idea is simply to roughen it up and give the glue a better surface to which to adhere. You could use sandpaper on the body tube, but it's kind of hard to control, and you're going to have an increased risk of scraping off the decorative part. So I'm going to come back here and find my line. All right, and kind of be careful that I don't let the other launch lug bop loose there. Okay, so here was my line, and again I'm just going to scrape a little bit here. And it's just a little bit shorter of a scrape length than the launch lug itself is. And then once more, we'll apply some all-purpose glue or wood glue to this. I'm just going to use my finger to even this out a bit. It's kind of gloppy on one end there. You do want to be careful that you don't get glue up inside the launch lug, because that'll make a thicker area that might catch on your launch rod. And now again, I'm just going to set this on first of all, and then pull it up again, and just wait 60 seconds or so for this to get tacky. Now while we're waiting, I'm going to talk ahead a little bit. The next step in here will be the application of the fins, which pretty much just slide up into the fin can, and those are glued on, and gluing in the thrusters. So it's going to be pretty much simple plastic gluing. And then after that, we'll be attaching the parachute to the shroud lines and getting that ready. And something else that you might want to consider adding is something like this. This is a snap swivel, like you would find in the fishing area of a sporting goods store. And I like to use these on my rockets to attach parachutes for two reasons. One is the snap part here allows you to detach the parachute when you're storing your rocket, and this just helps keep the parachute in better condition. It also allows you to quickly change parachutes, so that, for example, if you're launching on a windy day, you might want to use a parachute that's smaller than what came with this, and this allows you to change that out really quickly. The swivel part of this also helps keep your parachute from getting tangled. Unless you're just really exact about putting that parachute together, almost always they tend to twist in flight a little bit, and that's just unavoidable. If you have a swivel on here, as it twists, it twists around the swivel, and it helps keep it from tangling up around other parts of the rocket. So it's not something you have to have, it's just something you might want to consider. Alright, so by now I've probably talked enough that this has become tacky once more. And so I'm going to put this on. And once more here, line it up with the seam on the body tube. And then you will also want to check the alignment of this with the other launch lug. So if you sight down it, and it's kind of hard to show this on a camera, let's see if I can tilt this up a little bit, but you want to sight down it and actually look through one launch lug to the other, and when they're lined up, then also look and make sure that they are straight on the tube and they're the same place on the tube, which these ones are. Okay. Once they have dried, you can do an additional test of taking a rod, preferably an 1/8 inch launch rod, and sliding it through here and making sure that it slides freely. If it's binding up, it could be that these are not quite straight, and it's going to be easier to fix this at this stage than it is after you've put everything else on. If you do need to fix this after the glue is dried, just take your razor knife and very carefully cut underneath here. Once you've got those off, you may have to take the knife and scrape off the glue or use a little bit of sandpaper, but then you can realign these. But this is definitely something you want to check now and not find out when you've gone out to the field and they're ready to launch it, and lo and behold, they're crooked and it won't go on the launch rod straight, and when you go to launch it, either it gets stuck or it breaks a launch lug or something like that. Okay, we want to avoid doing that. I'm going to let these dry again for a few more minutes, and when we come back, we will attach the fins and the decorative thrusters. So several minutes have passed, and we've let the launch lugs adhere. And I'm just going to check this again, check the alignment. Still looks good. And so our next task is to put on the fins. Okay, so our fins are going to go into the slots here on the fin can. And the nice thing about these plastic fins is that they're already airfoiled. You don't have to worry about sanding them or anything like that. You may want to check and make sure that there aren't any big pieces of flash or residual plastic on these from the molding process. Most of these look pretty clean. There may be a little bit here. We're going to test fit all these dry, and so if they're hanging up at all, it usually means there's some stuff on here. And you can clean this off either with sandpaper or a hobby knife. If it's just a little bit of a ridge there like this, it won't make any difference. The plastic glue will actually melt that and bind it in. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is simply slide these in. Okay. And again, it does not tell you how far to do it, but you actually want these to be flush, preferably with both ends if they have been machined correctly. Okay, it's looking like if there's any difference in length, they're just a teeny bit short at the front, and that's fine. I prefer to keep them flush in the back. And there's not enough difference in the overhang that it's going to make a whole lot of difference which way you do it. Okay, that one's feeling a little bit tight, but I don't think it's going to be enough to cause us to worry about anything. Alright, so I've got these all dry fit in. And I'll take them out again, and again the diagram here shows putting just a little dab of glue on either end of this each fin when you get done. That's not going to be very strong. You may want to do it at the end of this anyway, but what I'm going to do is take these off now. Okay. And here again the trick is going to be getting enough glue to make them strong, but not so much that we have glue oozing out all over the place. So what I'm going to do here is put just a little bit of glue here inside. So if you can see that there, it's about a 5mm bead that I've squirted in. Okay, and now I can take the fin, push that in, and slide it all the way up. And at least initially the glue is going to act kind of like a lubricant, so be careful that you don't overshoot there. Okay, and there's just a little bit of glue now residual on the front end, and that's what we want. So that means there's just enough glue in here to hold the fin. You can see a little bit along the edge here, but it's not dripping over. Okay, and that's the outcome we want. We want just a little bit of glue coming out of the edge and a little bit up here in the front, and by the time that dries it'll be hardly noticeable at all. But now we've got a good bond going along the entire length. So I'm going to do that again. Okay, again I'm just going to squirt in about 5mm or so of glue. Alright, it's kind of bunching up there along the front. I'm going to slowly push this up. And this is the tight one that we had before. I'm just going to use the base of my hobby knife to get that flush, just like that. Okay, a little bit of excess glue there. If we go and try and wipe that, it's probably going to make a bigger mess than if we just leave it alone, so I'm just going to leave it alone. Alright, so that tells me maybe I need a slightly smaller amount here. And once more. If it's pushing up ahead there like that is, just slow down a little bit. Let the glue have time to get down in the cracks. my finger there, but that's alright. And then finally, our last one. Now it's sliding really easily, so go ahead and just take it a little slower and give the glue the time to penetrate. And just like that. Okay, so now you can see there's a little bit of glue on top of each one of those. That one's got a little bit more than others. But again, once this dries, most of that will just adhere down onto the surface of the plastic, and it will be just fine. In this case now, I am going to let this sit on top of my wood blocks. So that if the glue does run, it stays down in the base. Probably if you turn this upside down, it's going to be okay. Unless you just have a lot of excess glue, that shouldn't run anywhere. Okay, but I'm going to let this set for a little while. When we come back, we'll turn this back over and add the decorative thrusters to it, which is a very quick job. And then we will go to the parachute assembly. Okay, the fin glue is mostly dry here. It's certainly dry enough that we can do the rest. So I'll move that out of the way. And now we're going to take these little thrusters and they're going to simply insert into the holes here. And I'm going to dry fit these again and make sure that everything does fit. Okay, we've got a little bit of flash in this one here. There we go. Just move it out of the way. Okay, so all those fit. When we get this completely done, we're going to dry it like this. So, and this is going to help keep them straight. So before we even add any glue, I just want to look and see if there's anything that's really obviously out of place. It looks like it might be a little bit, just something to watch when we glue it. Okay, so I'm going to take these out again. And kind of use the same idea that we did with the fins. So we're going to just apply a little touch of glue into each of the holes rather than trying to put it on the thruster nozzles themselves. So I'm just going to put a little glue right there. Put that in. And I'm going to do this fairly quickly so that it doesn't have time to dry in place and be off kilter. And another one there. And that was the one that was kind of wobbly, so be careful of that. And then one more. Now these are solely for decoration. They won't affect the flight any. In fact, if anything, they'll probably make it fly a little bit lower just due to the added weight and drag. Okay, so now I'm going to set this upright. You can see a few little filaments of glue there. We can clean those off when we're done. Just to make sure these are all nicely seated and straight. And once more, we play the hurry up and wait game here. So I'm going to let these dry for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and put on the parachute and the nose cone. Now that the glue has set on the nozzles, we can take these and just kind of gently remove those little filaments of plastic cement there. And we can clean that up more when we're completely finished. Next we've got the parachute, and this is going to show us putting the parachute onto the nose cone right away. I'm actually going to wait and tie the parachute to the nose cone, or attach it to the nose cone, after we get everything else done, because it's going to be easier to put the stickers on the nose cone and things like that if we don't have the parachute in place. So I'm going to set the rocket itself aside here, and then I'm just going to move this out of the way, and we'll open up the parachute. Now this comes as a printed plastic sheet. It's actually a fairly big parachute here. And so the first thing we're going to do is cut out the parachute along the dotted lines here. You can do this with a pair of scissors or with a hobby knife. I recommend scissors, you have a bit more control. And on the corner of the sheet, it actually has some summary instructions as well. So you might want to hang on to those until we get to that point. Okay, so for example, this corner has how to attach the shroud lines to the parachute. Might come in handy later on. Alright, so I'm going to continue cutting this. And there's probably a few things more boring than watching someone cut out a piece of plastic. So when I come back here, we'll go to the shroud lines. Now my parachute is cut out, and the shroud lines kind of came in a wad in the kit. If you're careful, you can gently separate these. There should be a total of 3 of them here, so if we don't pull too hard at once, they're all kind of coming apart. And what it shows on one of those edge pieces that we cut off was that we're going to take each shroud line and put one end onto one circle here and another end onto another circle. And so we'll have 3 loops around here. And to attach these, we want these clear plastic coated discs here. So these are, I don't know what they are, mylar plastic. Kind of hard to see. And we actually want to do this. It's easier to attach the string to the discs here and then attach it to the parachute rather than trying to get it to line up on the parachute just right and then trying to slap the disc on top of it. So kind of an awkward big parachute there. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I will peel off maybe one of the discs like this. Right, and then I'm going to take the end of this and kind of make just a loop like this. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Right, you just want a good even distribution of the string around that. And it doesn't have to go in the same direction that the parachute shows. So now I'm just going to place this mostly centered there over the disc on the parachute. Okay, and then I'm going to put the other end of that string onto an adjacent circle. You can go counterclockwise or clockwise, it doesn't matter which. But basically you're going to have 3 loops sticking out from the parachute when we're done. Okay, so I've got another one here. Do make sure that you stretch out the entire shroud line. Make sure there's no loops or knots in it that are going to cause trouble later on. Okay, and once more I'm just going to kind of bend that around. Got some lovely fingerprints on there. They won't make any difference. Although it is a good idea to do this with relatively clean hands so that the oils on your fingers don't keep this from sticking. Okay, so there's my first two here, and we've got a whole loop of string in between. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video and do this with the other two strings, and I'm just going to work my way around the parachute until all of them are attached. Now I've got all of the shroud lines attached here. So there's one loop there, and we've got another loop over here. I'm turning this upside down. Okay, and then our third loop here. So that one, this is, I don't think there's enough room on the table here to show this, but okay, so this all can gather up together, and that forms the parachute there. I'm going to set this aside for now. We'll come back to putting this onto the rocket later on. I'm just going to set this over out of my way. Okay, and I want to do a couple of things here because in this next part we're going to be working with the nose cone and the shock cord. This nose cone is actually one single piece of plastic. On other model rockets, this would actually be in sections where we'd have a reducer and maybe a small body tube here, and then possibly another small body tube after this reducer, and then the nose cone. Since this doesn't have anything functional to do, it's just decorative, then that gives us actually a little bit more to work with. I can't tell what type of plastic this is. I think it's polyethylene, which means that if you wanted to paint it, you'd have to use special plastic paint. This is actually meant to go as is, but you may notice there's a seam on this side, and there's a seam on this side, which you may or may not care about. If you don't care about it, you can just leave this alone at this point and kind of skip through this part of the video. But if you want to be able to get rid of this, I'll show you a couple of things. Nothing will completely hide this, so let me just tell you that ahead of time, and then you can determine whether or not you want to put the rest of the effort into doing this. So there are a couple of ways we can get rid of the seam. The seam down here on the shoulder, this is where the nose cone will be inserted into the rocket like this. It doesn't really make any difference because you won't see it, and depending on how loose this is, this one's actually kind of loose, you may want to keep that in there for the additional friction. Alright, but it also gives you an area to test a few skills here if you want to try and remove it and see how well it's going to look. So one thing you could do is you could sand the seam here, and if you're going to do that though, you're going to want to sand the entire thing so you get a uniform appearance. If you do that, you're going to lose this glossy look to it. Now if you do it uniformly, at least it'll be uniformly not glossy. And you can test that if you do it down here. So this is 220 grit sandpaper. And so one thing I might do is just sand this off in here. Right, if I wanted to get rid of that seam. But it doesn't look all that great. Okay, it now looks all roughed up and such. Now if your nose cone was too tight, so if you put it on here and it really did not want to come back out again, I would recommend sanding it just like I have here. Okay. So the other thing you can do, one is you can try finer sandpapers. So this is a 500 grit wet dry sandpaper. And if you want to go through all the trouble of doing this, I would do it wet so you could spray just a little bit of water on here. And this might give you a better surface. Okay, so if I do this over here where I haven't sanded anything and take a look at it, okay, doesn't look as rough, but again, it is going to take away that glossy look. What else can you do? Well, you can also take your hobby knife and shave the plastic here. And if you're going to try this, I would practice down here where it won't make any difference if you mess it up. Okay, Okay, so I'm just shaving off a little bit there. You can also do this as a scraper, so if you take the back of your blade here toward the back of it and keep it close to perpendicular, you can do that. Okay, but it's going to show as well. And you may decide in the end that, you know, I don't care if that seam's there or not. It's just not worth the effort. And as I said, there's not a whole lot you can do to this to get rid of that seam entirely, simply because of the type of plastic this is. Polyethylene just does not work well using these types of typical techniques. So I'm going to go ahead and try to shave this down just a little bit, and we'll see how successful I am. Now, something that will hide part of this, when we get to toward the end of this assembly, there are some stickers that go on this part of the nose cone, and so they're going to hide a lot of the seams here, and you may actually want to measure on here where exactly those stickers go, and in that case rough up the surface a little bit with the sandpaper, and it'll probably make it stick better. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue. So this is mainly just a matter of aesthetics. It just kind of drives me nuts a little bit to have this ridge on here. And it drives me nuts a little bit less to flatten it out, even though I can still see the seam. Okay, so if you don't care about what this looks like on this seam here, just skip forward a few minutes and we'll get to the shock cord mount. And do watch and be careful that you don't cut yourself doing this. Up here on the rounded part of the nose cone, this is going to be the most difficult spot, just because it is rounded. Okay. Now, if you're one of those people that just absolutely can't stand having the imperfections on here, as I said, you could just sand this down all the way around, sand it till it's uniform. And find paints that are made specifically for polyethylene. Unfortunately, they are rare because polyethylene just doesn't stick well to anything, which is why they use it to make bottles and such. Almost to the point here where I've decided that this is about as good as it's going to get. And when we get to the point of putting the stickers on, I may change my mind and do a little bit more to it. I'm just going to give these a quick shave. This is easier if you have a nice new sharp blade on your knife. Alright, so I'm just going to make sure I've got everything that I've cut off of there. And as I said, it's not going to be perfect, and it's going to be really hard to get it perfect. So I'm going to leave it at that point. Alright, next we're going to do the shock cord mount. Remove my scrapings here. Okay. As far as elastic shock cords go, I actually kind of prefer this type that's got the cloth covering on it because you can glue it easier. So get this little shock cord anchor that came in the small parts package, and we're just going to cut it out. dispose of that. I had a little bit of a snafu with this video segment as we were recording it. The camera battery died just as I was assembling the shock cord mount here, but I didn't realize it until I had finished putting the shock cord into the rocket. So I'm going to redo this, and this is going to look a little bit different than what I had been doing. So if it suddenly looks like things changed, it's because they did. This is good though, because this also shows what you can do if you ever need to replace a shock cord mount. You can simply make the same thing out of a trapezoidal piece of paper here. This is just a bit of scrap paper, and I'm going to mark this like it is done in the instructions here, so as it just makes it easier to show this as I do it. Alright, so this, I'm going to actually write 1, 2, and 3 on here. Now my replacement shock cord is a little bit different. It's a bare rubber one instead of the cloth cover, but this all works in the same way. So the first thing I'm going to do is put a bead of glue down the center of this on the 2 and 3 sections. And you can be fairly generous with this because we're going to make this squish all through the entire mount. Now the instructions here show centering the cord within this. I actually do it a little bit differently. I'm going to set it at an angle. And the reason for this is because as we fold this up, this makes it not as thick. So if this were straight, the rubber here would lay directly over the rubber on the next piece, and this would make it bumpier. This just flattens it out a little bit. And now I'm going to fold this, so the area that I've got the 1 on, I'm going to fold that over onto the 2. And I'm going to squish this around and get lots of glue in there. So I want that glue to go everywhere underneath. Okay, I'm even going to spread this glue out a little bit ahead of time. Okay, and then I'm going to take, make sure I'm centered under my camera here, I'm going to take that section and fold it onto the 3 section. Okay, and I can adjust this now a little bit. It's not going to be perfectly centered, it's going to be off a little bit, like this. And I'm just going to pick this up, and I'm actually going to squish the, oops, broke the paper, it's okay, it'll glue back together. I'm going to squish the glue around in here so that it's all squished through there. And I'm going to put a little bit of a bend in it because this is going to go on the inside surface of the body tube. Alright, so I'm going to set that aside for just a moment. And now here is the body tube with the original shock cord in it already. So this is the one I had done and then didn't see that my video had turned off. So I'm going to just move this, I'm going to stuff it inside here so that you can't see it. And we're going to pretend like it's not even there yet. Alright, so here, according to our imagination, is a brand new body tube. And the way we're going to do this is in the instructions it shows this at 40 millimeters from the opening here. And that's a minimum, okay, because what we need is enough space so that when the nose cone is applied here, that none of the nose cone, shoulder gets in the way of that shock cord mount and vice versa. We don't want those impacting against each other. What I like to do is simply put this in as far as I can reach with my finger. And so with a nice big wide body tube like this, I can get my finger all the way in there, and I'm actually putting it right about in here. Okay. Now this is the part I can't do completely really in, but normally what we would do is now take this part, put a goodly amount of glue on there. Right, I'm going to do everything except actually stick this to the body tube. Okay, so you're going to want to smear this around. Excess glue on the finger there. So we're basically covering the whole surface of the shock cord mount. And now I'm going to put this on my finger, not touching the sides until I get this down where I want, and then I'm going to push this up against the inside of the body tube. And it doesn't matter where this goes. It could be on the launch lug side, it can be on the opposite side, it doesn't matter one bit. But since we actually already have a shock cord in here now, I'm not going to do this final step. I'm going to set this aside. Now let me clean off my finger. And since I had already done this once, this is already dry. Otherwise, it's a good idea to wait at least 15 minutes between this step and the next step. Okay, so I'm going to retrieve my shock cord here. Okay, and the last thing we need to do will be to attach the shock cord to the nose cone. Now, like the parachute, I'm actually going to wait on this step until after I put the decals on here, because that way I can work with this a lot easier and not have anything tied on to this while I'm trying to put the sticker decals on there. One thing you can do ahead of time, if you see right in here, this loop is where the shock cord and the parachute are going to attach. A lot of times there's some residual plastic in here called flash, and you can take your hobby knife here and cut that material out. Now don't cut all the way through this band here, because that's the part we need to have. But we don't need this excess plastic that's filling up here. Alright, so I'm going to come back after I finish cleaning that completely, and then we will apply the stickers to this. Now the next thing we're going to do before we put everything together is put the sticker set on. And I'm not going to show a video of all of this, but I want to show you a couple of things that you can do. You don't have to. But the nice thing about stickers is they can cover up design flaws, and in this case it's this seam here. As I showed before, you can kind of shave this off a bit, but it's really hard to do a whole lot without affecting the rest of the coloration of the plastic here. Now something I do want to do for these is I want to roughen the surface a little bit below where the sticker is going to get. So the sticker on these, I'm trying to measure against this, the Marvin the Martian sticker here, this is meant to go on each side in between these raised areas. So it's actually going to go right along the seam. And you can use the seam to act as kind of a guide along the underlining here. And what I want to do is I'm going to roughen this up just a little bit with some 220 grit sandpaper. And I'm going to cut just a little piece of this so I don't have a lot of edges overhanging that might catch something. So I'm just going to use a little tiny piece of sandpaper here because I only want to roughen the area that's going to be covered by the sticker, and I want to make sure and leave some unroughened area there too, so that nothing's going to show outside the sticker if I do this right. So I'm just going to mostly do around the middle here of the seam. And this is just giving a little bit better surface area for the adhesive of the sticker to stick. Again, it's because, as far as I can tell, this is polyethylene, and not lots of things stick to polyethylene really well. Okay, so there's that side. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. And when you're done with this part, you want to make sure and wipe it off really well with a slightly damp paper towel so that you get all these little plastic granules out of the way. Okay, this really isn't enough to flatten the seam or anything like that. It's just enough to give the adhesive on the stickers something to grip to. Alright, so I've got a paper towel here. I'm actually going to moisten it with a little bit of rubbing alcohol that I keep in a spray bottle for just such things. Okay, and then I'm just going to wipe this all out. This is actually a good idea even if you're not sanding it, just to make sure that any manufacturing oils and things like that are gone. There's anything you can do to help things stick, they're going to improve the overall life of the decorations on here. Okay. And the nice thing about using rubbing alcohol to do this is it evaporates off really quickly. Okay. So these stickers here, the Marvin the Martian stickers, are going to go along the seams in the middle of the nose cone. All these round ones are going to go on the fins, and I'm not going to video that part. You can do that yourself. And keep in mind, these are all just suggestions. You can put these stickers wherever you want. You know, if you want to put the Marvin the Martian fin, you know, on the fins, well, they're not going to fit, but you can fold them over. But I'm certainly not going to tell you how to do this. But if you want to make it look like what they have here in the instructions, we're going to go with that. The other one that's going to go on here on the nose is this long rectangular one. This is going to wrap around, and so if you want, you can do the same thing here, is roughen up the surface all the way around this. Just leave it smooth, say about 5 millimeters from each of the edges here. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. Move those out of the way. Okay, so again, get that seam first. And then I'm just going to kind of go back and forth as I slowly turn this, trying not to get near the edges. And you don't want to use anything really rough here either, because you can overdo this. You can get the surface too rough, and then the adhesive may not bind at all. And if you decide that this is just not worth it, that's fine. Just go ahead and put the stickers on anyway. Alright, I'm going to just take my moistened paper towel here once more and let that dry for a few seconds. Okay, now these stickers are pre-cut, and so you just have to peel them away from the paper here. And probably the hardest one is going to be this wrap. So I'm going to take that off. Again, if it's better to do this if you have relatively clean hands, so you don't have skin oils on here. Now I'm going to use the seam here as a guide. But I don't want the decal seam to start and end on that plastic seam. So I'm going to start it just below here. So here's the seam. I know that the glare on this might be a bit. So the seam is here. I've got the sticker starting here. And then I'm going to keep tension on the sticker here. And I may have to adjust a little bit. The idea now is to keep it parallel with the ends of the nose cone and keep some tension on it so that we don't get any wrinkles or bubbles, and you want it to just overlap like that. Okay, so the edges go straight across. We do have a little bit of overlapping of the image there. That part I can't help because I didn't make the sticker. Now just go through and press out any air bubbles. That actually went on very nicely. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and go through here, and we'll put the Marvin the Martians on the sides and the round stickers there on the fins. I'm going to stop the video here. I'm not going to go through all that part. I think that would be incredibly boring to watch. So when we come back, we'll tie all this together and attach the shock cord, the parachute, and everything to the main part of the rocket. So now we have the decals put on here. So the nose cone decals, the wrap on the top, and the Marvin the Martians here on the side. And then I went ahead and did the fins as well. Okay, it's just one on each fin on each side there. And so now we're going to come back to installing the parachute and attaching the shock cord to the nose cone. So let me bring the parachute back up here. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is just kind of draw everything into a line. So I'm going to hold the parachute in its center. And for now I'm just kind of scrunch that together, because what I need are all the shroud lines here. Okay, so I'm going to gather these up, and if you start at the attachment point for each one and just kind of move these along, they are going to overlap a little bit, but you want to try and keep them as untangled as possible. And now if I can get all of this to show at once. So I've got the shroud lines looped around my finger here, and back here I'm pulling snugly, but not too tight, on the parachute itself, so that all these corners should drop to roughly the same spot. Okay, so now I come back here, I'm just going to hold these into a loop, so I take it off my finger. Now, depending on which method you want to use here, if you want to permanently attach it like they show here, you're going to take your loop of parachute shrouds and kind of bring it down to a point and pass those through the attachment point on the nose cone. And this is where those bits of flash can be a pain. So you just take a pencil here. Okay, and so what you need to do is pull these through. And here, this can get tricky again, so hold the loop, hold the parachute, so I've got the parachute here, and my nose cone is basically hanging here. Alright, so make sure that all my shrouds are the right length again. I can set that down. And what I would do now is I'm going to take this and pass the nose cone through the loop, okay, and then still holding these, pull this down until it's taut around there. Now, I don't want to do this for mine. Okay, I would prefer to put a clip on it. So I'm going to pull this back out. Okay, and back the way I came. Let's see if I can do this without turning it into a big knot. Alright, and so I'm going to take this back off. Again, you don't have to do this. It's more a matter of personal preference. Okay, but now I'm going to, once again, make sure that I've got everything centered here. Oops. All right, so I'm going to pull all my lines taut, make sure they're all pretty much even. Okay, and I'm going to take that same loop, but now instead of passing it through the eye of the nose cone, I'm going to take a snap spool, and this is a really big one. I'm using this mainly for illustration. Usually for rockets I use one about half this size, but this just makes it easier to do on the camera. And so I'm going to pass this through the swivel eye. Okay, open that up again. And all the while, kind of back here in my hand, I'm holding on to those lines so they don't change length. Okay, now instead of passing the nose cone through, I'm going to pass the hook through and push this all the way down, and now pull it taut on the swivel eye. And now I'm going to go back and check here, so I'm going to pull this whole thing taut and make sure that all my lines are about the same size, and they are. Okay, so now if I'm just storing my rocket, I can take the parachute out and put it away on its own. Or like I said, if it's a really windy day out and I don't want this to be carried into the next county when I launch it, I can put on a smaller parachute. And if you're new to this, you can buy parachutes of different sizes from hobby outfits. In fact, I've got a couple here. Right, so the parachute that has Marvin printed on it there, it's a 18-inch parachute. This one is a 12-inch parachute. I think this is actually an 8 or a 6-inch. It's a really small one. So you could do a smaller parachute if you needed to. Probably wouldn't go smaller than a 12-inch parachute with this rocket. It's fairly heavy. But if we needed to, if we had a really windy day or something on our launch and we wanted to launch anyway, I might switch it out and put a smaller parachute on it. Alright, now before I attach the parachute, the one last thing we're going to do here is take the other end of our shock cord, the one that's not glued in, and we're going to pass that through the eye of our nose cone. And now I'm just going to double knot it. Okay, so there's one, and I'm going to tighten this down really good because as the elastic then snaps back, it actually helps tighten the knot. And then I'm going to tie another overhand knot on top of that. Okay, and cinch that down. And you notice here I've got some play here. I can move it up and down a little bit. I'm going to actually move that just a little bit off center. And now you can take just a little drop of white glue or wood glue. I'm actually going to use white glue for this because my bottle's got a narrower tip. And I'm just going to put a little dab of glue on the knot. And actually work that in with my finger a little bit. And that'll just help keep that knot from coming undone over time. And then I can cut off the excess. Don't cut it all off. You don't want to cut it right at the knot. Leave about 5 millimeters or about 1/4 of an inch there. And let that dry before you go and assemble the whole rocket. And now I can take my snap swivel, open it up, and attach it here. Okay. Now with this having a fairly thick plastic loop right there, it actually might be good to have a little bit bigger snap swivel. Like I said, this is a bigger one than I usually use. But you don't want it so small that it hooks and gets caught at an angle or something like that on the eyelet there. Okay, so that's it. That's all attached. Now to assemble this, like we would here, if you were doing this to assemble it for launching, you would apply some wadding. Now I'll give you an idea what this looks like. It basically looks like toilet paper. It's not. It's tissue paper that's been treated with a fire retardant. So you don't want to just use toilet paper for this, so you end up catching fire to someone's trees or something. Okay. But it comes so you can tear it off in squares. And what this does is prevent the hot gases that come from the motor's ejection charge from melting your parachute here. This is pretty thin plastic and it's easily melted. And generally the bigger around the body tube is, the more of this you're going to need. If you're just storing the rocket, you don't need to do this step. But I'll just show you this anyway. So you just loosely crumple this and then stuff it down. Keep the shock cord out of the way. And what you want this to do is actually kind of form a piston in here. The instructions show 3 to 4 squares. I would use at least 5 in this. I said this has got a fairly big body tube. You can also get reusable wadding that's made out of Nomex, and I don't have a piece here to show you at the moment. And it actually will attach to your shock cord, and you can stuff your parachute in and put it down. I highly recommend that. For years and years and years, I had never even heard of those. And then I found some from one of the hobby shops, and I've been really impressed with it. It works really well. It's really worth the investment. Like I said, I don't have a piece here. Okay, and then to fold your chute, again, you're going to kind of pull everything taut here. Some people like to actually unfold all this and then fold it in half and fold it into triangles. You can do that. It's not really necessary though. So I just like to hold the center. All right, pull all my shroud lines taut so that they're all the same length. And then if you follow the directions here, and this is actually the same method I like to use, I'm going to fold this down once, kind of spread it out here, and then I'm going to draw my shroud lines up. And so this is basically about 1/3 of the way, and I'm bringing it up onto the parachute like this. Okay. And then I'm going to bring it up again. This has got really nice long shroud lines, so I'm going to bring this up again. Okay, and then we fold this inward like this. Okay, and then this whole thing is going to fit down in the body tube. Way back when I was a kid and first started doing this, a lot of people would kind of roll up the parachute and wrap the shroud lines around that. And that has a less reliable probability of opening up when you launch this thing. So a lot of times what would happen is you'd launch it and the ejection charge would go off, the parachute would come out, but it wouldn't unfold. You just have this wad that would flop around. Something else you can do, especially if you're launching under cold conditions, is sprinkle a little bit of talcum powder into the parachute just before you pack it, and that'll help let it pop out more, slides out easier. If you use a lot, it also makes a little cloud of dust that makes it easier to track your rocket. Okay, now I've got a little bit of shot cord here hanging out and a little bit of shroud line, and so I'm just going to kind of easily tuck that in. Okay, and then that's all together here. Now, see how loose that is? We don't want that because what can happen is that can come loose during the launch, usually right after it finishes thrusting, and you get what's called drag separation, and suddenly this opens up too soon. That's not a good thing to have. And so what I'm going to do here is add just a little bit of masking tape around this to adjust the thickness. As soon as I can find my mask. There we go. Okay, so just a little bit here of regular masking tape. I would suggest using like 3/4 inch, which is 1/2 to 3/4 inch here. You don't want the really big stuff. And you don't necessarily have to take this all the way around. Okay, so I usually start with about 1/2 a circumference. So bring this just below the shoulder here, so this little notch. And I'm going to run this around. Okay, that almost meets there. I probably don't need that much, so I'm going to just back it off. And, you know, masking tape's not expensive, so if you have to replace this, it's not a big deal. Okay, so now I'm going to put this back in. Okay, and now if I wobble it around, it's a little bit loose just because of that 1 or 2 millimeters there. But if I give this a little bit of a tug, it's not coming off readily. All right, if I pull it there, it will. And that's about what you want. So it shouldn't shake loose here. And again, that's just the spacing without the masking tape. That's not a big deal there. Okay, so you don't want it to come loose by itself. And that actually is a little bit loose yet. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and peel this off and then do a full wrap of the circumference. Now if you have the opposite problem, if you stick that nose cone in and it's really tight, then what you want to do is take some fine sandpaper and sand around the circumference here until it fits snugly but not tightly. So, and this can change depending on things like weather conditions. So I'm videotaping this right now. Well, not tape, it's all digital now. But I'm making this video now in Arkansas in late spring, which means that the temperature is a little bit hot, even though I've got the air conditioning going. And Arkansas tends to be humid all the time anyway. But if we get into winter and things are cooler and maybe drier, either the body tube can change its diameter a little bit, plastic doesn't do it as much. But you might have to change this depending on your weather conditions and the temperature and such. Okay? And it's not a big deal, but it's something to be aware of. So you want to test fit this before every launch. Alright, so now, if I do the shake test here, okay, if I shake it hard enough, it's loosening, but it's not coming off. That's good. But if I give it a steady pull, it comes off. And that's what we want. So that's the nice happy medium there. Okay, so that's the whole rocket. Let me see here if I can zoom this out just a little bit here. Okay, and that's pretty much ready to go. All it needs at this point is an engine and an igniter, and it's ready to launch. I'm not going to go into engine preparation here. I will have another video on preparing all types of model rockets for launch. But it does show you here a quick overview in the bottom of the instructions. Okay, this has been kind of a fun model to build, and I hope you have as easy a time as I did here, and have a good launch.